Hello, my name is Simon Waller, and welcome to Just a Little Bit Forward. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about whether or not doing purposeful work sometimes provides us an excuse for doing things badly. So when we talk about the concept of purposeful work, I notice that, when we look at organizations that work in the not-for-profit and the public sector, organizations that are tasked with doing the good work of society, that often the levels of accountability and expectations around productivity and efficiency and effectiveness are lower than when we look at commercial organizations. And I'm trying to understand what perhaps sits at the bottom of this. I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine and someone who came out of the private sector. They had their own business, they sold it, and they were approaching their retirement age and decided that they would spend some time working in local government in a regional council with the idea of being this opportunity to give back and share some of their expertise with the public sector. They were in that role for about 4 or 5 years, and over that time, they constantly were given projects that required that kind of bump in efficiency and effectiveness because it wasn't necessarily something that was a capability or a way of being or working or a culture that was natural to that local council. After about 4 or 5 years, he shared this story with me where he got pulled aside by the CEO, and the CEO asked him and said, "What point are you going to be okay with mediocrity?" And this friend of mine was a little bit taken aback, this idea that he should ever be comfortable with mediocrity. But it was somehow accepted that in that environment, that mediocrity was okay. And this really challenges my sensibilities around purposeful work, because if the work is truly purposeful, that purpose should provide a motivator for us. It should want us to exceed and outperform because the work we are doing in the world is so important. But it feels like there's a number of barriers that seem to get in the way of that type of thinking. I think one challenge potentially in that space is that we have this sense that doing purposeful work poorly is still morally superior to doing average work really well. And this is a challenging concept in and of itself, because what is morally right can change from one perspective to another. What represents good work shifts from one person to another. But there may be a sense that if you believe you are doing morally good work, that you excuse yourself from operating under the same pressures and the same expectations that someone might do in a fully commercial setting. I think potentially another challenge is that people who do good work expect other good things around work, like governance and work-life balance and flexible work arrangements. And it's not to say that these things aren't important. It's just to say that when we take them in their absolute, they can actually reduce the amount of effort and energy that gets put into change. And that diversion of effort means we're less likely to achieve the goals that we might normally otherwise have hoped to achieve. I also think there's potentially a belief that pursuing good work creates or generates moral credits, and we have a tendency to spend those credits before they've even been earned. There is some work being done around kind of social identity theory, and it says that in social identity theory, we create and acquire things in our lives that represent outside, or to the people outside of us, how we feel about ourselves on the inside. And so that if we value internally things like healthy lifestyles, that we go to the gym, we share pictures of us pumping iron on social media. So the work around this has also shown that sometimes we can proclaim things, and in that proclamation, we actually demotivate ourselves towards its goal. That by proclaiming the desire to pursue and run a marathon actually absolves us, or we don't actually then feel the same motivation to do the thing, because we get all the accolades and we get the self-identity associated with the proclamation as opposed to the action itself. And so none of this is around individual belief or dedication to a cause. This is a conversation about what type of systems emerge and what type of norms we become comfortable with in the pursuit of purposeful work, and whether that's okay, or whether it is that we should actually be taking purposeful work as a motivator and a driver. And perhaps we need to be sometimes entirely brutal about the way that we approach our purposeful work because we shouldn't let anything get in the way of its pursuit and the outcomes to society that we're trying to generate. And somewhere in there as well, there's potentially some of the criticism that people in the public sector feel is aimed at them. They see themselves as being doing this purposeful work and don't understand how others on the outside don't see the good work that they're doing. But what the people on the outside don't see is the outcomes of that work. It's not the intent, it's the intent versus the outcomes. And potentially that lack of outcomes is creating a erosion of trust in the public sector and the purposeful organizations that are doing this work. So this is my question for you to ponder. We're going to pause very soon and you're going to have 5 minutes of almost silence to kind of think through this question if you're not ready for that. That's okay. You can fast forward to the next track or whatever it is that's on your Spotify or Apple playlist. The question I want to pose to you is this: is in some contexts, does doing good work badly feel morally superior to doing bad work or even average work well? And if that's the case, have you noticed there are times where the level of effectiveness and efficiency and productivity around our purposeful work is actually substandard? And are we okay with that? And if the work wasn't purposeful, would we be okay with that level of performance?